You know, it's almost fantastic that the Indigo Parallel is a game that actually exists on Steam going for a price tag. It's even more miraculous that people actually buy the game and enjoy it. It seems almost impossible. The Indigo Parallel is a game so weird and so out there that I can't imagine it fitting into any gaming niche. Yet, the glowing reviews speak for themselves. The game seems like a nice little indie game. So why then am I so surprised that people enjoy it? Why am I so surprised that the game costs money? This isn't to say that I don't like the Indigo Parallel, or I don't think it should go for money. Quite the opposite actually. I love the game, and I think the price is very fair for the game you get. I'm just surprised that others like the game, because the niche the Indigo Parallel fills is so obscure that I would expect a lot of people to simply not understand it and therefore not enjoy their time with it. And I'm not claiming to understand the Indigo Parallel either. However, I can appreciate it for what it is. This video isn't sponsored or anything. The creator never paid me to say anything positive. The creator did, however, graciously give me a copy of the game for free and told me to check it out. The reason I talk about the Indigo Parallel is because the experience I had with it is the reason I'm making this video. Because this game, if you can even call it that, is so weird, so odd, so different that it doesn't even feel like it's about anything. It is one example of a genre of games I like to call games about nothing. What do I even mean by that? How can a game be about nothing? What I mean specifically is a game that doesn't have any story, or progression, or items, or leveling, or any other telltale signs of a regular game. If regular games were incredibly detailed works of art depicting tangible things, then games like the Indigo Parallel would be abstract art, the kind of splotches of paint and lines that don't go anywhere that you often see at some art museums. And the Indigo Parallel, along with all the other games I talk about in this video, is very much abstract. The Indigo Parallel is a game seemingly so complex that it invented its own alphabet, yet is lacking in anything that makes me think of it as a game. So what is the Indigo Parallel? Well, it's a series of rooms, or mini-games, or outdoor spaces devoid of sense, or cities with people with eyes for heads. None of these things are connected to each other or ever really explained. They kind of just happen depending on where you decide to explore. It's really hard to pinpoint what the Indigo Parallel even is. The truth is, the Indigo Parallel is a horror game, and a puzzle game, and a first-person shooter, and an arcade game, all at the same time. The Indigo Parallel does not like being categorized. As such, it is somehow all and none of these things, combining elements of all these different mechanics to make it its own thing that isn't the sum of its parts. So what's the gameplay like? Well, for starters, the most striking and obvious aspect of the gameplay is the movement. The movement is finicky. You move a little too fast for the small environments, and you sort of slide every time you stop running. You could call this just an oversight, or a glitch even, but I think it was intentional, giving a metaphorical gameplay-wise way of telling the player that this isn't a normal game. The Indigo Parallel starts out as a linear, almost horror game, until it really opens up. The way the game presents itself is a lot like LSD Dream Emulator. LSD Dream Emulator is a 1998 game that the Indigo Parallel draws a lot from. Dream Emulator is very similarly weird, and you can tell the influence of LSD Dream Emulator on the project, to the point where if you decide to go a specific way, all the textures become filled with Japanese text, just like if you venture long enough in Dream Emulator. In fact, LSD Dream Emulator is even mentioned in the email I received from the developer. To go back to something I said earlier, the game isn't linear. You could go one way and be transported to a weird rock dimension with a burning sun, or choose to go another way and you'll turn into a mechanical spider roaming around whatever this place is. Or you could hop into a car and fight robots with lasers and turrets. None of these options make sense in the context of each other. They all seem like completely different games. You're put into these worlds with no context, no information, and nothing to go on. You're sort of just there. I decided to play out my time with Indigo one way, but when I watched videos of other people playing it, they played it a completely different way, landing in different locations and interacting with different things. I watched a video by The Cursed Judge, great channel by the way, and it blew me away how, after multiple hours of playing, He had a completely different experience than I did. To an outside observer, the cursed judge might as well have been playing a different game. So what is the point of the Indigo Parallel? I think the point of the game can be summed up by the instructions for another game, similarly not about anything, called Running Memories. Explore until you're done exploring, then press escape to quit. And that description, as mechanical and as lifeless as it may be, sums up Indigo very well. I once found myself in a tranquil, shallow lake with floating jellyfish and Japanese tories. When I walked through a door, I saw a stock image of a businesswoman with a hand for a head and an eye in its palm. And when I walked into the businesswoman hand thing, I got sent to these rooms that appeared to have veins until I found a gun and started shooting floating eye robots that attacked me. What even is this situation? Nobody told me to walk into this creature. In fact, there appeared to be a perfectly good exit behind it, but this entire section was created just in case you did want to check out this random hand lady. It isn't just that though, it's also the level of attention to detail that the Indigo Parallel has. I skimmed over the fact that this game made an entire alphabet, but it's true. You can find a board full of codes that line up with the English alphabet, that you can then use to decipher codes around the game. It also has a literal insanity level, which you can turn up and down in the game's menu. Level 1 simply changes some colors to make the environment look more uncanny. Level 2 makes it so faces and other unsettling imagery occasionally fades in and out of the screen. These become more common at level 3, until at level 4 they are completely persistent. I mean, there's just so much detail in such a short, seemingly game about nothing. Playing Indigo is an adventure, and I really enjoyed my time with it, but it still does not change the fact that it's not for everyone. The Indigo Parallel is about nothing, and I think that makes a lot of sense. What the game is trying to be doesn't allow for it to be about anything. Even if you wanted to add a story to it, I don't think it would fit very well. It's like trying to add a story to LSD Dream Emulator. Why even try? The Indigo Parallel does kind of have a story if you really look, but for the most part, I never saw myself interacting with it much. The Indigo Parallel is about nothing, and I think there's a beauty to that. In a landscape dominated by AAA games trying to forcibly let you know how deep and convoluted they are, games about nothing, like the Indigo Parallel, are a breath of fresh air from the endless supply of shallow attempts at stories we get from a lot of AAA titles. Experimental games like the Indigo Parallel usually never end up on Steam though. Not too many people want to put effort into such an experimental title and sell it. I mean, why would you? Why take the risk when you could just as easily put as much effort into something more mainstream and common and probably make even more money? Which is why it's rare to find gems like the Indigo Parallel going for a price tag on such a large storefront. A lot of games in a similar niche end up on sites like itch.io because they can afford to be more experimental. So I left Steam in my search for these games, and what I found was pure gold. Stephen Lavelle, most known for his studio Ink Repair, has an entire website where he has published nearly 500 experiences that he's been making since 2004. Nearly 20 years of game development on this one site, and they're all free. I call them experiences rather than games for good reason. They don't exactly fit the definition of a game. One of these experiences has you controlling a flying camera going around different hotel rooms and bedrooms. Another makes you take control of a ball rolling around to get to certain points, but in a nauseating first person. One of the experiences on Ink Repair's sites literally only asks you to roll some dice. That is literally all you do and let your mind fall to rest. It's hard to call them anything more than an interactive screensaver, but every once in a while, you get an experience that you can somewhat call a game. Something like Subway Adventure, which is an Ink Repair game that has a very simple goal in mind, one that's outlined when you first open it. Pick somewhere you think you might want to go, and go there. The game functions very much like a real-life train station, complete with a map of the Dream World of Sadness Metro, copyrighted by Transport for Sadness, of course. Like the simple description that the game gives itself, all you do in Subway Adventure is get on a train and let it take you to where you want to go. You can choose to go to such interesting and active train stations such as Nowhere, Storage Facility, or Edible Trains. Seriously though, it's kind of fun learning how the trains work and how to get to the places you want to go. For example, I decided immediately that I wanted to go to the train station Balls, because why not? After spending about 20 minutes figuring out how the trains travel between stations, I made it there. Much like real-life subway stations, you also need to stop by other stations in order to get to the station you want to go to. The station I went to, Balls, was a dark train station with the people replaced by balls, and for whatever reason, you have the ability to jump really high. Which makes sense once you realize you need superhuman jumping abilities to get from one side of the station to the other. Balls isn't alone in this. Every single train station has its own theme, something that makes it unique. Like this station, Time, that replaces every human with a clock and every connection with other stations as the future. It also displays the real-life time in the top right corner, which I found kind of funny. Or the station Cats, which is completely populated by, you guessed it, cats, barring a see-through interior with hallways and other connections being half the size of you. Presumably because they were made for cats, and well, you aren't one. Or Flower Market, which, as the name suggests, is a flower market. It's filled with flowers for different occasions, even though they're all the same. Or the Hospital Station, which has a bunch of sections for people with different statuses, like wealthy, poor, those with potential, those without, despite the fact that they all lead to an identical hospital. And for some reason, everyone there is on strike. Everyone who isn't laying down in a bed, that is. Admittedly, it's funny. There isn't really a higher purpose besides that in Subway Adventure. The only other real mechanic in the game, besides deciding what train you want to board, is a system of buttons hidden at each station that marks those stations in a notebook that you keep in your inventory. Because it is genuinely fun to see what was done with each station. There's a certain mood to exploring them that I haven't seen recreated in any other game I've played. The music also aids in this mood. There is a different score for each train station, and each fits perfectly, like the almost unsettling elevator-sounding music of Masmo, or the slow, high-pitched pings of Graveyard, or the claustrophobic occasional chimes of Forest. Aside from that, the only real choice you have is what train to get on. There is no real form of progression. Simply explore until you get bored, then press escape to quit. Another ink repair thing is Olam House, which has you walking into a hotel to write a book. It seems like everyone there is trying to. You can visit different people in their rooms. They talk. Not really about anything, but they do talk. The talking is done through a coffee mug that you're given when you enter. If you walk around the hotel enough, you might discover someone who puts books into a fireplace to launch them into the stratosphere in order to deliver them around the world. Or you might find a room with someone who isn't writing a book, but is instead into astronomy and came here for a quiet place to do his work. When you eventually do start to work on the novel, the typewriter you're using decapitates you, and you're given a sword and swing it at people around the hotel. The music also turns more eerie and mysterious until you eventually leave. Another one is Running Memories, which I mentioned earlier. It's an experience that has even less of what you would call a game. You simply run around with a mishmash of places and imagery that all overlap with each other. There is no stop button. The only input you have is the left and right arrow keys and the spacebar to jump. Why was this made? Why was any of this made? Clearly, there is no higher purpose to any of these games. They certainly wouldn't be found on Steam or any other store page. When it comes to making games, companies really don't like risks, which is why the existence of the aforementioned LSD Dream Emulator is so surprising. LSD Dream Emulator is a game I mentioned as being an inspiration for the Indigo Parallel. Dream Emulator is such a surprising game because, much like the Indigo Parallel, it was weird. It didn't make any sense. It didn't have a story, nor did it have any real gameplay besides where to walk. The only real mechanic of the game was the ability to walk into walls and appear elsewhere. That's it. Sometimes you can come across oddities, whether that be a lion attacking you or a gray man in a gray trench coat and hat appearing in front of you and sending you to the next world. That's the only real substance Dream Emulator has. So why does it exist? Nowadays, games can be experimental, with individual developers and platforms that support creative games like itch.io. But this freedom didn't exist in 1998 when LSD Dream Emulator was released. If a game was going to be made, It would have a team of sometimes hundreds of developers with a publisher ready to ship the thing when it came out. And almost every game at the time was physical. So how the hell was Dream Emulator even released at such a specific time in video game history? I mean, it certainly wasn't Doom, which is what 90% of games were trying to be at the time. It was its own weird, unique little thing, in an industry that frowned upon the bold and creative. It was for this reason, I think, that it never sold very well, and was only released in Japan. But now, more than ever, we can release games that are experiments. Games that push the limit of what can even be considered a game. It's not very hard to see the impact that LSD Dream Emulator left on a lot of games that attempt to fill a similar genre. In a way, LSD Dream Emulator was the original game about nothing. Every game I've talked about thus far has been an exploration game in some capacity. That's because it's really hard to release a game that has these characteristics that isn't exploratory in some way. A linear game that has all the characteristics of a game about nothing is very hard to find. But I did manage to find one. A woefully underappreciated itch.io game called 2:22am. 2:22am isn't a horror game. It has all the characteristics of one, but it doesn't quite fit the part. However, many aspects of 2:22am may lead you to believe that it is in fact a horror game, whether that be the eerie text that doesn't communicate any information, or the random places and situations you're put into, or the seemingly deeper meaning that we don't get to uncover because the game ends too early. All of these things may lead you to believe that 2:22am is a horror game, but I personally disagree with that notion. The game is stylized like a late night broadcast somewhere in the early 2000s. You can barely even call it a game. It only has a handful of playable sections, and you can't even move in the majority of them. 2:22am shows you things without context. It makes no attempt to give you anything cohesive or something to go on. You are put into random situations and are shown low quality, completely objectless videos. A shower head spewing water, a pot of water steaming, a late night drive home, along with occasional text pop-ups that only further confuse you. The gameplay sections are similarly confusing. You flip an egg, climb up a ladder, dig a grave. None of these things alone are unsettling, but you always get the feeling that something's wrong. That beneath all of these surface level out of context scenarios, there's something darker and scarier than you can ever imagine. You never get to know what that thing is, however, because the game just ends. And the text is just so mysterious. Heart in hand, nothing ends, home sweet home. What is any of this even supposed to mean? Nothing. And that's the point. 2:22am feels almost liminal. If you've ever had the experience of watching cable television alone at night, you already know what it feels like to play this game. It perfectly captures the feeling of watching old TV half asleep, when you can barely keep your eyes open, and you sure as hell aren't paying attention to whatever's playing. And admittedly, there can be some comfort in that scenario. A sort of lo-fi feeling to being comfortable on your couch while slowly drifting to sleep late at night with the TV playing in the background. But this is not what 2:22am captures. No. 2:22am captures the slight unease you feel in a situation like that. A slight unsettling feeling watching channels like Adult Swim or Nickelodeon late at night, where it's just you and the screen, with nothing but your tired eyes and growing drowsiness to distract you from whatever you're watching. I haven't experienced that feeling in a number of years. While you can still fall asleep late at night to Netflix or a variety of other streaming services, I find the random nature and the personality of certain channels special when trying to capture this feeling. And it's probably the only thing I miss about cable television. 2:22am brought me back to that. The only instructions you are given on the itch.io page is to play at night and play alone. But I'd like to add a third addition. Play tired. Play just before bed, or a little past whenever you're supposed to go to sleep. I find that it makes the game even better at what it's trying to do. I love 2:22am. I adore it. I wholeheartedly suggest you play it. It's free and takes about 15 minutes to complete. And play it how it's meant to be played. Play alone, play at night, and play tired. Fugue and Void is a game that I don't have the writing capacity to talk about in its entirety. I can hardly put pen to paper when it comes to this game. There's so much I'd like to talk about, but at the same time, finding the words to say about it is much more challenging. The game starts with probably one of the boldest beginnings to any indie game I've ever played. The game starts with a cutscene. A cutscene where you see visuals of random, incoherent things. Cubes stacking on top of one another infinitely. A pitch black planet with canyons that seem to go inconceivably far down. A seemingly close-up shot of said planet, and many more hauntingly confusing visuals. This goes on for nearly 10 minutes, and you can't skip it. This cutscene has nothing to do with what the game is about. Although, I guess the game itself isn't about anything either. The opening ends on top of some black, murky-looking water. Then a path arises, which you then land on. Finally, 10 minutes in, the game actually starts. The path is illuminated by a mysterious light above. The bridge appears to look textureless, until you simply look down and see all of the subtle details that make up your thin arc. After walking for a little while, you see a building, one that, what it lacks in height, makes up for in length, as it seems to stretch infinitely in the x-axis. Once you enter this brutalist, concrete house structure, you walk around for a bit until you see a hole in the ground with pipes running along and below it. You jump down, and this is where the game really begins. One of my favorite parts of the whole project is the sound design. I can properly hear each individual footstep, and its echo is controlled by the size of the room. The scraping of concrete whenever you open a door using a button, the sound of the lights and the background noise in this maze section. It all makes the game feel so cinematic. Fugue and Void establishes many questions early on. Where are we? What is this? We are clearly not in our own world. This isn't Earth. This is an alien place taking the form of a building on Earth. We are no doubt in a different world, yet the compound that builds this world is simple concrete. It feels like it's trying to masquerade, pretend like this is a human creation by using such a fundamental component of our infrastructure. A human-looking building created without human touch. As such, the building feels incomplete, not like a place built for people, but simply a place built to exist. Its massive monoliths, inefficient hallway design, disregard for safety, and incomprehensible scales make this point even more apparent. It reminds me a lot of the Backrooms, a place also built to exist, and not by or for the concern of people. Soulless, purposeless architecture. Near the end, the game slowly transitions into being somewhat organic. The concrete below you has been replaced by sand. For the first time, sunlight seeps through the cracks in the windows. And for the first time, you go outside. A vast desert falls into view. You left your concrete prison. The building bars a familiar, infinitely horizontal appearance as when you first went in. A figure of a human sits in front of you. The first mark of anything human in a world which is anything but. When you walk into the figure, you are teleported to an even larger desert. In the sky lies a vast superstructure, seemingly built above the atmosphere. Lines of monoliths twice your size guide you, until eventually you see the base of the superstructure far off in the distance, giving you a megalophobic sense of dread. As you keep walking, you see two parallel statues and a sun-like ball in the middle, until you arrive on a platform and hit another button, and then get teleported elsewhere. You see a series of machines, or at least what appears to be machinery. The game teleports you to a couple of these quote machines. I call them machines because that's what I imagine they are. Seemingly, whatever this is gives the feeling that it has a reason to exist, far beyond what humans could comprehend. The death of meaning that Fugue and Void represents is tied together in its final moments. Just after the scene with the machinery, a red dome that formerly concealed your view is taken off to reveal a small studio apartment. Looking back, reveals a chair with said dome covering it, implying the entire thing was a simulation. Scattered around the apartment are pictures of locations that you've been through throughout the game. The ending provides context for who we even are. In Fugue and Void, we take control of a person living in a far dystopian future. One look at the exterior of the apartment confirms this. When you leave the apartment, you step onto a balcony overlooking a large, cold, dark, foggy, brutalist cityscape, with massive monolithic skyscrapers that reach up farther than your limited foggy vision can see. If there is anything you take away from this video, anything at all, it is to download the free Fugue and Void and look out at the barren, post-apocalyptic, brutalist cityscape with your own eyes. Despite the fact I've spoiled the ending in some events, there really is nothing like playing the game yourself and experiencing this moment alone. The games I've mentioned thus far have all been horror games in some capacity, or at least had some horror elements. Whether that be the unsettling places and creatures you find in the Indigo Parallel, a handful of weirdly creepy train stations in Subway Adventure, the encounters with the macabre in LSD Dream Emulator, the nostalgic horror of 2:22 AM, or the liminal post-apocalyptic feel of Fugue and Void. But not every game that has the qualities that this video is about has to be unsettling. In fact, I think games that excel the most in this genre are those that aren't unsettling at all. Proteus is an experience that isn't scary. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's relaxing. Very relaxing. So relaxing, in fact, its status as a game is often called into question. And rightly so. In Proteus, there's nothing to interact with. No story, no items, no leveling system, nothing. There certainly aren't any walls to walk through like in Dream Emulator, no trains to board like in Subway Adventure, or buttons to interact with like in Fugue and Void. What there is in Proteus is an island. When you press the start button, your eyes open, revealing an island. A randomized, procedurally generated island. Your island is completely unique from anyone else's. It's truly yours. The only gameplay of Proteus is the exploration of said island. All you do is walk. All you do is explore the island. You can come across some animals in your adventures, and the animals are really the only way of interacting with the world around you. Chickens will run away from you, frogs will rhythmically jump around you, bees will fly around you, giving you a temporary speed boost. But that's it. That's the entire experience. Now I could sit here and tell you many mechanical things about Proteus. I could tell you how much I love the simplistic art style, or how the seasons change, or how satisfying it is to chase a frog with the pinging sound it makes getting increasingly higher until it jumps a little bit extra high and makes a slightly higher pinging noise. Okay, that last one might have just been me. But these mechanical descriptions miss the point of Proteus. Me attempting to put a description on the game is ultimately futile. I cannot give this game a description. Nobody can. You need to play it. You need to feel it to understand it. I think that's one of the only games I can say that about. So, instead of trying to communicate the feeling of playing it in words, I think I'll instead tell you a story. I was up late. I couldn't sleep. So, I decided to boot up Proteus just to experience some calm. I played for a mere 5 minutes before I fell asleep. When I woke up, I saw this. I saw the stars in the night sky, along with an aurora as big as the night itself illuminating the trees below, while a calming yet hopeful melody played in the background. It was... God, I can't even put that experience into words. That moment was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had playing a video game. Proteus is just so meditative. Another anecdote, I'd been wanting to get into the habit of meditating for weeks, but I could never stop thinking. That is, until I played Proteus. My mind instantly goes to rest as I hear the relaxing score and the sounds of the creatures. Playing Proteus is like meditating. I don't think when I play Proteus. I don't worry about my problems, I just observe. Much like the gameplay, I myself simply exist. Then what does that make Proteus? Is Proteus a game? Is it an experience? A meditation simulator? An interactive screensaver? Well, I think the question itself is flawed. If we keep attempting to analyze something's status as a game, we will ultimately fall short. In the words of Keith Stewart's Guardian article on Proteus, Proteus has become something of a political decision in the gaming community. The arguments over whether or not it's a game are doomed to fall short of anything conclusive. All games are discrete systems of pleasure. Defining beyond that is folly. Is Proteus a game? It doesn't matter. Wasting your time attempting to categorize Proteus is ultimately futile, and you should take it for what it is, a relaxing experience, and one that I won't soon forget. The soundtrack also aids in how relaxing the game is, and it changes based on where you are and what season you're in. In the height of spring, you might hear a joyful, mellow score, the hum of bees and the clucking of hens, or the slightly unsettling winter score, where all the trees have died and all you hear is a persistent background noise. Yet it's still comforting in its own way. Something to keep in mind is that Proteus isn't for everyone. I imagine a good chunk of people who try it will likely get bored. I've seen many negative Steam reviews saying they paid $10 for, ostensibly, an interactive screensaver. And I get that. I'm not here to tell you that you need to be some next level artsy person to see the game for what it truly is and to enjoy it, but if you take a step back from the baseline qualities, you find an experience that I have never seen in any other game I've ever played. Despite my claim in the title, and what I've been talking about this entire video, and despite all of the games I've mentioned here's obvious subversion of convention, these games aren't about nothing. You could make a very real point that Subway Adventure is, well, an adventure game, that Fugue and Void is a puzzle game / brutalist playground. You could even say that Proteus is about appreciating nature, which would make it in and of itself about something. And you wouldn't be wrong. Games about nothing are impossible, because the term itself is an oxymoron. A game about nothing implies that it itself is not a game. But what really is a game? Your answer to that question and your interpretation of what qualifies for such a medium tells me more about you than it does any of these quote games. But much like putting Proteus into the category of game or art, it doesn't matter. Are video games art? Who cares? Can a game truly be about nothing? I can't answer that for you. What I can do, however, is show you these amazing games and give you the tools to decide for yourself. All but 2 of these games are completely free. They will all be linked in the description, and I encourage everyone watching to check them out. Take a break from your Call of Duties and your Fortnites, and play a game about nothing. Decide if it's a game about nothing, because in the end, the categories that all of these experiences fall under is up to you. And I think there's a beauty in that. A game about nothing is a blank canvas, so go out there and paint it. Tell me what these games are about. I'll be waiting when you get back.